What I'm going to do today is talk to you about these two parashot, Korach and Chukat. That is Korah, a man, and Chukat, which is ordinances of some kind. This is one of those mysterious things. I hope that you have had an opportunity to read the Torah portion, because this portion right here is just jam-packed, full of some of the most wonderful and amazing pictures of the Messiah, Yeshua. Some wonderful prophetic shadow pictures. At least 3 or 4 of them are all packed into this section of the book of Bamidbar, Numbers. And you've probably heard some of these before, I'm sure, but I want to just read some sections to you and discuss, what we find in these sections and relate them to the Messiah and dig a little bit deeper to see if we can find some interesting stuff that will be edifying for us and see what we can learn. So the first thing I want to do is, if you have your Bible or your electronic Bible or whatever you're using, open it up to the book of Numbers, chapter 16, because there's a little section here that I want to read for you that's just so critical. And it starts right at the beginning of chapter 16. And this is where we have a rebellion brews up against Moses and against Aaron. I put the mediator here because it's not entirely clear what Moses's designation is. I mean, he's clearly a mediator of the covenant. He is a leader. He's a prophet, but he's not a king. But his brother Aaron is the high priest. But they together form the upper echelon of the leadership structure within the nation of Israel, and the people are rebelling against both of them from 2 different angles at least. And so we're going to read this little section here, starting in Numbers chapter 16, verse 1, and here we'll get started. Now, Korah, the son of Issar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Pelet, the sons of Reuben, took action. And they rose up before Moses, together with some of the sons of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, chosen in the assembly, men of renown. They assembled together against Moses and Aaron, and they said to them, "You have gone far enough, for all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and Yahweh is in their midst. Why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of Yahweh?" When Moses heard this, he fell on his face, and he spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, Tomorrow morning, Yahweh will show who is his and who is holy, and will bring him near to himself. Even the one whom he will choose, he will bring near to himself. Do this. Take censers for yourselves, Korah and all your company, and put fire in them, and lay incense upon them in the presence of Yahweh tomorrow. And the man whom Yahweh chooses shall be the one who is holy. You have gone far enough, you sons of Levi. Then Moshe said to Korah, Hear now, you sons of Levi. Is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the service of the tabernacle of Yahweh, and to stand before the congregation to minister to them? And that he has brought you near, Korah, and all your brothers, sons of Levi, with you. Are you seeking for the priesthood also? Therefore you and all your company are gathered together against Yahweh. But as for Aaron, who is he that you grumble against him? Then Moshe sent a summons to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, but they said, We will not come up. Is it not enough that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to have us die in the wilderness, but you would also lord it over us? Indeed, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor have you given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Would you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up." Then Moshe became very angry and said to Yehovah, "Do not regard their offering. I have not taken a single donkey from them, nor have I done harm to any of them." Moshe said to Korah, "You and all your company be present before Yehovah tomorrow, both you and they, along with Aaron. Each of you take his fire pan and put incense on it, and each of you bring his censer before Yehovah, 250 fire pans. Also you and Aaron shall each bring his fire pan." So they each took his own censer and put fire on it, and laid incense on it, and they stood at the doorway of the tent of meeting with Moses and Aaron. Thus Korah assembled all the congregation against them at the doorway of the tent of meeting, and the glory of Yehovah appeared to all the congregation. Then Yehovah spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying, "Separate yourselves from among this congregation, so that I may consume them instantly." But they fell on their faces and said, "O God, God of the spirits of all flesh, when one man sins, will you be angry with the entire congregation?" Then Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the congregation, saying, step back from around the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram." Then Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, with the elders of Israel following him. And he spoke to the congregation, saying, "Depart now from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing that belongs to them, or you will be swept away in all their sin." So they got back from around the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood in the doorway of their tents, along with their wives and their sons and their little ones. And Moshe said, "By this you shall know that Yehovah has sent me to do all these deeds, for this is not my doing. If these men die the death of all men, or if they suffer the fate of all men, then Yehovah has not sent me. But if Yehovah brings about an entirely new thing, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that they own, and they descend alive into the grave, Sheol, then you will understand that these men have spurned Yehovah." As he finished speaking all these words, the ground that was under them split open, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, and their households, and all the men who belonged to Korah, with their possessions. So they and all that belonged to them went down alive to Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. All Israel who were around them fled at their outcry, for they said, "The earth may swallow us up." Fire also came forth from Yehovah and consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense. Then Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, "Say to Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, that he shall take up the censers out of the midst of the blaze, for they are holy, and you scatter the burning coals abroad. As for the censers of these men who have sinned at the cost of their lives, let them be made into hammered sheets for a plating of the altar, since they did present them before Yehovah, and they are holy, and they shall be for a sign to the sons of Israel." So Eleazar the priest took the bronze censers which the men who were burned had offered, and they hammered them out as a plating for the altar, as a reminder to the sons of Israel that no layman who is not of the descendants of Aaron should come near to burn incense before Yehovah, so that he will not become like Korah and his company, just as Yehovah had spoken to him through Moses. But on the next day, all the congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You are the ones who have caused the death of Yehovah's people." It came about, however, that when the congregation had assembled against Moses and Aaron, that they turned toward the tent of meeting, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of Yehovah appeared. Then Moshe and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting, and Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, "Get away from this congregation, that I may consume them instantly." Then they fell on their faces. And Moshe said to Aharon, take your censer and put in it fire from the altar and lay incense on it. Then bring it quickly to the congregation and make atonement for them, for wrath has gone forth from Yahweh. The plague has begun. Then Aaron took it, as Moses had spoken, and ran into the midst of the assembly. For behold, the plague had already begun among the people. So he put on the incense and made atonement for the people. And he took his stand between the dead and the living, so that the plague was checked. But those who died by the plague were 14,700 people, besides those who died on account of Korach. Then Aaron returned to Moses at the doorway of the tent of meeting, for the plague had been checked. Chapter 17. Then Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, and get from them a rod for each father's household, 12 rods from all their leaders according to their fathers' households. You shall write each name on his rod, and write Aaron's name on the rod that represents Levi. For there is one rod for each of the heads of their fathers' households. You shall then deposit them in the tent of meeting in front of the ark of the covenant, the ark of the testimony, where I meet with you. It will come about that the rod of the man whom I choose will sprout. Thus I will lessen from upon myself the grumblings of the sons of Israel who are grumbling against you. Moshe therefore spoke to the sons of Israel, and all the leaders gave him a rod apiece, for each leader according to their fathers' households, 12 rods, with the rod of Aaron among their rods. So Moses deposited the rods before Yahweh in the tent of testimony. Now on the next day Moshe went into the tent of the testimony, and behold, the rod of Aaron for the house of Levi had sprouted, and put forth buds, and produced blossoms, and it bore ripe almonds. Moshe then brought out all the rods from the presence of Yahweh to all the sons of Israel, and they looked, and each man took his rod. But Yahweh said to Moshe, Put back the rod of Aaron before the testimony to be kept as a sign against the rebels, that you may put an end to their grumbling against me, so that they will not die. Thus Moshe did, just as Yahweh had commanded him. So he did. Then the sons of Israel spoke to Moshe, saying, Behold, we perish, we are dying, we are all dying. Everyone who comes near to the tabernacle of Yahweh must die. Are we to perish completely? There you go, folks. That is the grand story of a massive rebellion. And the consequences. Absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning. So I want to bring up a couple of points for you. Seeing the big picture here. The people kept testing Yahweh, and were really having a hard time being able to believe. Refusing to believe is what it kind of seems like. And so in the last Torah portion that we read together, it was talking about this. They sent those spies into the wilderness to do a little reconnaissance mission, and they essentially refused to go into the promised land. Now, I want you to think about that for just a moment. These two separate issues. In the case of the sons of Israel, they rejected the promised land. They rejected the kingdom, so to speak, if you want to use a metaphor, because Paul, remember, tells us in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 10 that all of these things that happened to those people in those days were written for the instruction of us, and Paul would include himself in this us, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. And so look at this as a prophetic shadow picture of something that's like a menorah pattern, where it's kind of like the image of each other. And think about it like this. These people rejected the land. They rejected the kingdom, so to speak, the land where the kingdom was. And now, immediately after that, they're rejecting their leadership. You could say, for the sake of discussion, that Moses would be like a king and Aaron like a high priest. He is a high priest. So they have rejected everything. They have rejected the land. They have rejected their leadership. Now, if these things are written for us, upon whom the ends of the ages have come, for Paul, in relation to the arrival of Yeshua, saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand, and in relation to us, upon whom the ends of the ages have still come, what might that mean for us? Let me ask you this. These people, when they saw that there was going to be a challenge with entering into the kingdom of God, they were going to have to put in some effort. They were going to have to put up a fight. They were going to have to do something. They rebelled, and they threw a fit, like a person. You know how it is when you've got a child who's rebellious, and you spank this child, and he's ready for a fight. And he's ready to stand up and fight back. That's what these people did. Yeshua said, okay, you are rejected from entering the kingdom. You're all going to die here in the wilderness, because they had already tested him 10 times. But now you see him saying, okay, you've tested me 10 times. This is the last straw. You have rejected my leadership. You've rejected my help. You have just been whining and whining and whining. And now I'm wanting to bring you into this land that I have promised you. And now you're saying you don't want to go. And so, okay, you don't have to go. You can die here in the wilderness. And then, of course, they just threw a fit. And now, immediately after that, they're saying, we don't want Moses as our leader. We don't want Aaron as our leader. In fact, you took us out of a land flowing with milk and honey. Do you see the heavy delusion that is being experienced here? Where these people perceive of their land of slavery and captivity as a land flowing with milk and honey, and are rejecting the real land flowing with milk and honey. They can't even see it. They can't see straight anymore. Now, let me ask you this. What if just play with me here for just a second. I'm just going to throw something out there to you that might be interesting. What if Yeshua, by his Spirit, to some prophets around the internet, whatever, but in a really convincing way, told his people in the world today, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. But many of you are not going to make it. You're not going in. What do you think would happen if that happened again? That Yeshua, by the Spirit of God, revealed to his people, you guys have failed miserably. Many of you are not going into the kingdom right now. Many of you are, you all had this thing in your mind where you were just going to be able to go along in life and do whatever the heck you wanted and didn't really pay attention to what I told you to do. You were all living it up, enjoying your own little kingdom. And now you...
Challenging Moses' authority.
What did you say, Angela?
Challenging the authority of Moses.
Yeah, think about that from this perspective as well. Angela said these people are challenging the authority of Moses and the priesthood. Now, we might say, okay, so we're challenging the authority. Who are we challenging the authority of? Moses. So, seriously, it's the same darn thing. But you might say, well, Jesus has replaced Moses. In a manner of speaking, yes. But we know, each of us here at least knows well enough to say Jesus did not come and supplant his own Father's law. So what do you think would happen?
Say something about if you knew Moses, you would
yeah, he said to the Pharisees, if you knew what Moses had written, you would believe me because he wrote about me. But I mean, and then you read some of these passages in the book of Matthew where he says, I'm telling you, in that day, that people are going to be saying to me, Lord, Lord, didn't we do this and that and this and that? And he's going to say to them, I have no idea who you are. Step back. Interesting choice of words. Get away from me. You workers of Torahlessness. Now, how do you think that if our ancestors had their minds filled with this gobbledygook, that we could just do whatever we wanted and that things were going to be fine and Jesus was going to show up and rapture us off the planet and we're going to be spared any grief and all the Jews are going to die along with all the heathen in some type of conflagration. And then Jesus lets it be known that's not happening that way, guys. Some of you, I'm going to take off the planet. Some of you, I'm going to ask to hang around and die for the cause. Some of you think you're joining the kingdom and you're just not. In fact, I think it might be a bulk of you. Are these people going to respond any differently than these people did in this Torah portion? I don't think so. I think they're going to respond exactly as these people did. They're going to rebel. And they're going to fight against God. I actually remember a conversation, and I won't say in regards to whom this conversation pertains, but it was like back in the day we were doing all this research on the pre-tribulation rapture. And we, Angie and I were convinced at that time that there was not going to be a pre-tribulation rapture, that there was every very real possibility that if the crap hit the fan, we were going to have to face it. We were going to have to deal with it through God's grace and help. And, who knows how it would work out. But we just kind of had a feeling from our studies of the Bible that it just wasn't what we had been taught as a child. And as we began to share some of what we had been learning with other people, which was our first mistake.
Well, not the first, but
One of our big mistakes was to share what we were learning with other people. Some of the Christians that we responded to were just flabbergasted, just beside themselves with the idea that they were not going to be sucked off of the planet before anything bad happened. And in fact, one of them said, I'll tell you what, if that's true, I don't want anything to do with that God. That's not my God. And I thought, wow, my goodness. That's when God doesn't conform to the expectations of the multitude, I think that's what a lot of them are going to say. This is not my God. I don't recognize this God. And this God is going to say the same thing. I don't recognize you. You're not my people, and I am not your God. Am I talking to myself out there? Anyone?
I think, Ellen, that's a very accurate possibility of what people would do. I mean,
It's frightening, isn't it?
it isn't. People, it's almost like they're in, and it doesn't matter what your belief system is. They think that the one they have in their minds is the reality. And to pose something to them to be like, well, if God is this way or this way or this way, and it's not like what you believe, is he still God? Is God God no matter what? And that's a really hard thing for some people to accept, that you don't get to invent God, whoever that is or whatever that is, even if it's your definition of Jesus,
Yep.
if you will.
That's
you don't get to invent it. It's a given. He's a
Yep. That's a great insight. Absolutely fantastic insight. Thank you. Angela?
When Korah rebelled,
Can you,
it's just one quick thing.
just Angela's going to just make a quick comment.
Something that might sound similar to what people might say today is when this assembly gathered against Moses and Aaron, they said, "You've gone far enough. All the congregation are holy, every one of them."
What's your point? What's your point?
They didn't want to put anyone, it was everyone, all dogs go to heaven, I think. is what they were saying.
That's a good, yeah. I think there's some real relevance to what Angela's saying there as you read that little section, and the people, these guys were saying, the whole congregation is holy. Why are you trying to be special? This is true to such a degree, but not to the degree that they're talking about.
Well, his response is, "I will bring near whom I choose."
Yeah, he said, yeah, that's exactly right. Angela said, when the leaders of the rebellion said, "Hey, we are all holy. God loves us all together." And Moses said, "Let's put that theory to the test. You claim that God loves us all and it's all going to be okay. Let's see what God says about that." And God says, "Not so. Not so. I will decide who is holy and who I want to come close to me." Yes, thank you, Wayne. That's a good insight. I don't know if you guys have seen Wayne's comment there. It's to check into that. These people said everybody's special. Well, you know what that means. Obviously, when everyone's special, then no one's special. And Moses is saying, that's certainly true, but you're saying, you're not saying it for valid purposes. You're trying to make yourself special so that you can usurp God's authority. And we have to remember that the Torah tells us repeatedly that Moses was incredibly humble and did not want this position. We remember he almost got in pretty good trouble with God because he wanted Moses to go and do this mission, and Moses said, "I am not the guy for the job." And he protested so much that God got angry and said, "I'm going to do this with you or without you, but you're coming." So I would just say, man, the big picture here for us trying to learn from this would be, don't rebel. And now there's certainly an element of rebelling against the Torah of Moses. There's certainly an element of that. But there's also an element about rebelling against Yeshua. Now, most Christians would say, "I am not rebelling against Yeshua. I love Yeshua. He's my Savior." Well, he's everyone's Savior, but he's not everyone's Lord. God, Yeshua is the Savior of the world, potentially. But only those who avail themselves of that salvation have access to that. And he says, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." And we know that his commandments are not burdensome. They are the same commandments that the Father gave to everybody way, way back. God never changes. So it's a difficult thing. Yeah, everyone gets a trophy. Absolutely. That is a good comment. Excuse me. When everybody's holy, everybody's doing fine. There's no hierarchy, unfortunately. I'm sorry. I got caught up in talking for a little too long, probably on that subject. I want to just give you a brief bit of information. Who are these leaders of the rebellion? And I think it helps to understand this. The first person mentioned is Korach. And if you have done a little bit of research, you see that Korah, or Korach, is a high-ranking Levite from the tribe of Kohath. Kohath is stationed to the south of the tabernacle. And they are responsible for, you remember that there are the tribe of Levi is divided into 4 sections. Just in front of the tent of meeting on the east side is Aaron and his sons and Moses. And then further east is the tribe of Judah and a couple of other tribes. To the south of the tabernacle is Kohath and his people, who are in charge of the menorah, the Ark of the Covenant, the golden altar of incense, the table of showbread, all of those holy items inside the tabernacle. Kohath and his tribe are responsible for just those things. The other two subdivisions of the tribe of Levi are on the west side of the tabernacle and on the north side of the tabernacle, and they're responsible for the rods and poles, and then the other tribe is responsible for all of the fabrics and the folding of cloth and carrying all this stuff. So Kohath and the tribe that Korach belongs to has a pretty high responsibility of handling and being in control of the sacred objects, the most sacred objects. He's also, now this is where it gets to some Jewish mythology, writings in the supposition, some of it, that says that Korach was a person who had very high rank in Egypt, and that he's looking around and witnessing what Aaron is doing and saying to himself, man, I was in control in Egypt. I had a really good position, and here I'm coming along and I have been relegated to a small position with not much power, and I'm watching this guy Aaron, and he's talking trash about Moses behind his back. His sister gets leprosy from talking trash. He makes a golden calf. According to what Korah's looking at, he's saying Aaron is not doing a great job. The fact that we're having all of this trouble in the wilderness here is a pretty good indication that we're not experiencing the favor of God and things are going badly, and I think I could do better. And so he makes his play. And his compadres in sin are Dathan, Aviram, and On, who are all from the tribe of Reuben. Now, Reuben, if you'll remember, is the firstborn son of Jacob. He should have had the leadership of all 12 tribes, but he forfeited that by sleeping with his father's concubine, and he lost his firstborn position to the tribe of Joseph. So these guys, Dathan, Aviram, and On, are from the tribe of Reuben. Note that the tribe of Korah on the south of the tabernacle is combined with the tribe of Reuben on the south of the tabernacle. So they are camping next to one another. This is probably how the conspiracy got started. They are camping in the same spot. And they want, I believe that the text suggests this, that Dathan and Aviram and On, they want the civil leadership. Korach wants the priestly, spiritual leadership. And these guys, this core conspiracy of 4 guys, Korah, Dathan, Aviram, and On, form a conspiracy and get 250 of the chief men, the men of renown from all the tribes. These guys get a nice cabal together of some of the most powerful men in the whole nation in order to overthrow both the civil and the religious leadership of the nation of Israel. I don't think I need to point out to you the similarities to what we're dealing with today in America, but think about it from a spiritual, religious perspective of people trying to overthrow the priesthood of Yeshua. I mean, I know that the priesthood of Yeshua is a priesthood after the order of Melchizedek, and he is a combination of king and priest. And like I said, most people would say, no. I don't want to overthrow the priesthood of Yeshua. But when you don't do what he says, and you have your own ideas about how things should be done, then you kind of are overthrowing the priesthood and the leadership of Yeshua. Now, the rebel argument, the argument that these 254 men make is, I wanted to bring one thing to your attention. Notice that these leaders from the tribe of Reuben are three: Dathan, Aviram, and On. Notice that On is never mentioned again. Don't know why that is, but it is supposed by the sages that this dude backed out, that he saw that this was headed for a disaster, and that he was kind of only half in. And when the conspirators actually launched their plan, he kind of backed up and said, "Okay, I'm out of here. I don't really want anything to do with this." Also note that the text does seem to say that Korah and all of his companions were swallowed up by the earth. But we know from another chapter in just a little bit from now that the sons of Korach actually were not with their father. They backed down. In fact, you've heard of that musical group, the sons of Korah. Those are the sons of this guy. Not the musical group, obviously, but the musical group is named after the sons of Korah, who actually became singers in the tabernacle and in the temple when David, their descendants were followers of David and became singers in the temple that Solomon built. And these guys, there are actually some psalms in your Bible that were written by the sons of Korah. So they did not join their father. They escape the wrath of God. There's an interesting lesson for you right there. Now, the rebel argument. You take too much upon yourselves, which is basically saying share power with us or give us power. The whole congregation is holy. You're not special. And the fact that we're struggling out here and we don't have everything we want, it means that you've got us on the wrong path. They are trying to usurp God's plan for who is in control. And they are definitely fighting against God. They think they're fighting against Moses and Aaron, but they're not. They're fighting against God himself. That's a key point to consider and remember. Now, this is an interesting thing. And I'd get your notes handy if you want to take a note about this, because I've got a couple of scriptures for you that I want you to consider as I look at this little next part here. It says in chapter 16, verses 28 through 30, if these men die, then it says, but if Yehovah do a new thing, if these guys die the way of everybody, then you'll know that that God did not send me, and you shouldn't listen to me. But if these guys die in a unique way, and the earth opens up and swallows them, then you will know that Yehovah has sent me. Does that sound familiar to you at all? Anyone? I would bring your attention to some statements, several of them, that Yeshua made, that were essentially the same thing. That Yeshua said pretty much exactly the same thing. In John chapter 10, I'll give you a couple of them that you can look into, and I'll read one of them to you. If you look at the Gospel of John chapter 10, I'll take you there for just a moment. The Gospel of John chapter 10, starting in verse 32, let's say. Yeshua is talking to these zealots, the Pharisees and Sadducees and scribes and such, and he says, back it up just a little bit to chapter 10, verse 29, for example, says, my Father who has given them to me, these people who he's going to give eternal life to, is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one. So again, the Jews picked up stones to throw at him, and Yeshua answered them, "Many good works I have shown you from my Father. Because of which of these works do you intend to stone me?" And the Yehudim, the Jews, answered, saying, "We do not stone you for a good work, but for blasphemy, and because you, being a man, make yourself out to be God." And Yeshua answered them, "Is it not written in your Torah, I said, you are gods?" If he called them gods, to whom the word of God came, and it is impossible for the scripture to be broken, do you say of him whom the Father set apart and set into the world, you are blaspheming, because I said, I am the Son of God? If I do not do the works of the Father, do not believe me. But if I do, though you do not believe me, believe the works at least, so that you will know and believe that the Father is in me and I in him. And therefore they tried to seize him. That's just one example, and there are several. You can also look at John chapter 12.
How is that like it?
How is that like it? Because Yeshua keeps telling them, my words that I am speaking are not mine. But even if you refuse to believe me, believe because of the works that I am doing. They testify of me that I and my Father are one, that I am doing my Father's will, not my own. That's exactly what Moses says in chapter 16, verses 28 through 30. I am not speaking from myself. Yehovah will do a new thing. And therefore, you have to read between the lines a little bit, but you'll see now he's saying, therefore you will know that it is not from me. It's exactly what Yeshua is saying. Believe what I am saying. And if you cannot believe what I am saying, at least believe the works so that you'll maybe it'll shake your mind loose. And I mean, we can certainly see the works that Moses did are dwarfed by Yeshua, and yet they're still spectacular. And for whom did he say this? Not for the people who are about to be swallowed up, not for the rebels, but for the people who were listening. Because they were all going to die. They're all getting sucked up into the ground. It's for the people who are listening that this demonstration of power was to get them to understand, I am not speaking these words on my own initiative. These are not my words. I do not want this job. I am not making stuff up. So then, that's what he's talking about. And you can see that in John chapter 10, verse 32. You can see it in John chapter 12, verse 49. You can see it in John chapter 14, verses 10 and 11. Take a look at some of those things. So we see, again, that Moshe is a wonderful little shadow picture of the Messiah Yeshua and the work that he would do later. Now, Aaron, with this next little episode of the rod that blooms and blossoms and sends forth almonds. I mean, that is a wonderful shadow picture in itself. I mean, you've got a dead stick, a dead branch that seems to be completely dead and obviously has been cut off of the tree that it was grown from some time back, and becomes alive again.
And the menorah is modeled after an almond tree.
And yes, Angela is pointing out that this is an almond branch. Obviously, it's blooming almonds. You know that if Yeshua tells us repeatedly, figs cannot produce thistles. Vines do not produce figs. Almond branch produces almonds. So this is an almond tree. You notice that the menorah is got almond blossoms on it. The almond is a fascinating thing. But this almond branch that Aaron uses as his staff comes back to life and produces buds and flowers and ripe almonds. Another wonderful shadow picture of the Messiah Yeshua, being a branch that has been cut off, seems to be dead, but comes back to life and produces great fruitfulness. And what?
And light.
and light, and is set aside as a sign for the rebels. That's what the whole purpose of this was, to set that staff aside to be a sign to the rebels. Fascinating stuff. Anyone else have any comments, questions, or concerns about that before I move forward a little bit? I'm sorry, I could spend more time on this. Believe me, I could, but I just can't. Angela, do you want to say something?
Yeah.
Please do.
Just for those of you, I know that several of you out there are looking into Revelation lately, and I just wanted to point out some things that you might want to consider this whole Numbers chapter 16 and 17 as some kind of parallel to what's going on in Revelation, because you've got the censers, you've got the fire and the incense, you've got the entire company gathered against Yehovah, you've got not a normal death, you have the ground opening its mouth for a different reason, but I would put those side by side and see what you get. You've got them descending alive into Sheol, or the grave. You've got fire coming forth from Yehovah, consuming the rebels. You've got the scattering of burning coals. You've got this plague, and then the censer, and then him taking a censer and standing in between the living and dead, making atonement. You've got names written down. This time it's on rods instead of stones, like in Revelation. And then you've got this question of all this perishing, and are we going to perish completely? So then what you want to do is really consider what's coming up next when it talks about the Levites, and this whole idea that how Korach said everyone is holy, so everyone should be able to approach, because that is not what is described in this next chapter. And I don't know that being a Levite is something you would actually want, considering how it's going to describe what their responsibility is.
Good point. Thank you, Angela. I wanted to say just briefly, what is the takeaway? Just broad strokes, what is the takeaway from this episodes, these two little episodes here? Number one is, God... you notice that I put on my notes there on the screen there, it says that dog won't hunt. And that I put that as a bit of a joke, but it's not. It's terribly serious. But it's a joke kind of for us Americans, because I have mentioned to you on multiple occasions that Americans are rebels by heart. We do not like authority of any kind. We are a law unto ourselves, and we don't like listening to anybody tell us what to do. We don't have authority. We don't have authority in our churches. We don't have spiritual authority of any kind. And people will say, "Oh, but Jesus is our authority." We don't even like Jesus' authority.
Not unless he lets you do anything.
Not unless he lets you do what you want and leaves you alone and just blesses you full of blessings.
We don't even want the police anymore.
Yeah, we don't even want the police anymore. And no, I'm not. Those are secular people who are just rebels by nature.
Yes, but that's...
But it extends to us people who are supposed to be the people of God. I put that dog won't hunt because in the West, in America especially, but also throughout Europe and places like that, people despise authority in general. And I got to remind you that God establishes leaders for us. I mean, hey, you should all vote, and vote your conscience, vote your principles. But God's going to give you the president that he wants you to have. He's going to give you the leaders that he feels that you need, or that he wants in control for his purposes. So by all means, vote, but God's going to get his man. You should not rebel against authority. And I know that there's none of us out there who are Christians. We're freaking out about the people who are rebelling against authority. We're not rebelling against authority. We wish everyone would just kowtow. But then, the tables turn often. And God forbid, in my own opinion, Trump loses the presidency and somebody else gets involved. Then, what are you going to say? God establishes leaders? God wanted us to have Joe Biden as a president? If Joe Biden becomes our president, then yes, God wanted us to have Joe Biden as our president. What are you going to do? You're going to submit to the authorities that God establishes for you. There's a point to rebel if your authorities are saying, hey, sacrifice to this idol or take this mark of the beast or, whatever it is. Yeah, you rebel if your leaders are telling you to do what is absolutely wrong and forbidden. But if they're just not lined up with you ideologically, if they're basically willing to let you do what you want, but you just don't agree with them at all, you better submit. God doesn't like rebels, period. So our human leaders are not perfect, but we still have to submit to them. And we abhor authority here in the West and seemingly have none. And it shows. It shows that we don't have any authority. Contentment is critical. Envy and the desire for more is very, very damaging. Very, very damaging. We have to be content with what God has given us. He tells us in no uncertain terms that He will provide for all of our needs. And we should be happy. But I know, I talk to my children about this and I say, I want you guys to strive for the best that you can be. And that might mean a raise or a higher position in society or in the company you work for. But you gotta balance that with being content with what you have. There is a delicate balance there. And I would say also one of the most important factors to consider here is separate yourselves from evildoers, lest you partake in their punishment. That's a big one. That's a big one. Punishment starts with the household of God. And if you are in league or in tight with or are partaking with a group of people who God finds abhorrent and He's intending to punish, and you got to steer clear of people like that. You got to steer clear of it, lest you partake of their punishment. So that's all I have to say about that section. That's a big chunk of the section that we were going to talk about tonight, and I'm going to go on to the next section, but I want to give you just a moment. Does anyone want to comment, questions, concerns on that? Anyone?
Yeah, maybe one thing. I always find it interesting that sometimes Moses speaks really to the people after he first talks to the Father. Sometimes he first talks almost as if he's in tune with the Father and knows exactly what will happen, or that he says, this will happen, I'm going to make it so, and know that the Father will back me up in my decision, because my decision is that of the Father.
That's a great observation, and I thank you for bringing that up. I actually have a note here that I had to skip over just because I didn't really feel like I had time to deal with it, but it is the idea that if you've read the book of John, you know that Jacob, where he says, the prayer of a righteous man availeth much. And it was thus that Elijah, during the days of Ahab, prayed that it would not rain. And it did not rain for 3 years and 6 months at the command of Elijah. He didn't request, the text doesn't tell us that he had a conference call with God and said, hey, these people are really irritating me and they're being wicked and they're worshiping idols, and I'd like to tell them that it's not going to rain for 3.5 years as a punishment. Can I go ahead and do that? He just did it. And here we see the same thing with Moshe, saying the ground is going to open up. I think that comes from, not from Moses having to speak with the Father and say, have a little conference and say, I'm going to do this, would you back me up? It's just him having a heart for the Father. Notice also that in the book of Revelation, chapter 11, it says something remarkably similar. These two witnesses have the power to withhold rain on the earth for 3.5 years, the same time as Elijah. They also have the power to strike the earth with plagues as often as they feel like it. That's someone who is very tight with God and is a man after God's own heart, I think you would say, as it relates to David. These people, Moses, Elijah, these two witnesses in the book of the Revelation, James understood that these people have the heart of God bound up in their heart so much that it might be by the power of God's Spirit that they speak, being compelled by God's Spirit to speak these things. And so therefore God is speaking through them. Could also be that they're just so in tune with the Spirit of God that, whether he's speaking through them or they're just really in tune with it, I'm not really sure, but there's some type of connection there for sure. I hope that helps, John, as much as I can explain that.
Absolutely, it does. And also a great point about the two witnesses. Makes sense.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah. Daryl wants to
Yeah,
say something.
Alan.
Go, Daryl.
Yeah, you know what? Every year when we hear about this Torah portion, this Torah portion, probably more than any other throughout the entire year, shakes me to my core. And it's only because I understand how important obedience is, and I keep forgetting. These people, Korah's people, were believers. They understood the Torah. They followed the Torah. And yet, look what happened to them. And every year, I pray, Abba, please let me not be amongst Korah's people. And throughout the year, I find myself doing exactly what they were doing. Year after year after year, I keep making this mistake, and I know better.
That's a good point.
I pray that everybody understands the importance of this Torah portion and understand how critical your salvation is to obedience. There's a lot more to being just a believer and thinking you're going to be saved. I'm telling everybody that's listening, please wake up and understand the criticalness of this Torah portion. It could change your destiny forever.
Agreed, 100%. Thank you so much, Daryl. I could not agree more, and I think that this Torah portion is really, really powerful. And I feel the same way every year when I read it. And this year, since we didn't meet the last week, I've had 2 weeks to chew on this Torah portion. I have 2 Torah portions to cover, but I spent a lot of time with this portion of it, just because it's so relevant to the world that we live in, and I just keep going back to Paul saying this stuff was written for you guys. This stuff was written for you guys, and I'm like, golly, what do I have to learn here? What do I have to learn here? And it is just as Daryl said. Obedience is so critical. Wayne, speak to me, or Marie, whoever.
This is Wayne, but I'm speaking for both of us, of course.
Of course. Because you have the spirit of Marie inside you.
Hey, we're one. We're 2 different people, but we're one.
You are one.
Moses was considered a friend to God. The disciples were considered friends to Jesus. And what you was just hitting on is that if you're considered a friend and you have that intimate, close relationship to Yeshua, to Yahweh, to God in general, then you have access to just being able to doing certain things because of your close and your intimate relationship to God, like how Elijah was able to just command the rain. how Yeshua said, "See, your friend, all these things I've learned from the Father, I've taught you, so you go out and do similar things." So it's like once you get that relationship where you are considered a friend, then you can just go out and already with the authority that's preordaining you from the Lord, just go out and do things, say and do things.
I think you're absolutely right, Wayne, and I think that he is waiting and wanting very much for a people who is obedient and is seeking his face and is searching out his word and is filled with zealousness, like Pincus, who is ready to stand up and do his will. And it's so rare. It's so very rare, unfortunately. And what does that mean? And I think it behooves us to just stand back for a second and say, what does that mean? Does that mean that you, as a law-abiding Christian and a good American citizen, need to be out there counter-protesting and saying, "Hey, all you lawless people, get in line"? I don't think he gives a flying frog's hairy rear end about that. I think what he's talking about for us is, do what I tell you. Do what I tell you, and be an example around you of doing what I tell you. And speak that truth to others. Some of them, some of you, some of us, he might call to speak loudly and boldly and confrontationally. There are those who are called to that. Others of us, he would say, to proclaim it boldly but quietly to the people with whom you have in your sphere of influence. To say and to do what is right and to be an example to those around you who would see your righteous behavior and give glory to God in the day of visitation. If you're familiar with your scriptures, you know that I was just quoting a passage there. I don't know where it's from. Probably the book of 1 Peter, maybe. Maybe one of the letters of Paul. I'm not sure. But you doing what is right and speaking what is right and being a witness to what is right is what he wants you to do. And I encourage you to do it more and more. Don't grow weary of doing what is right. Thank you guys very much for those comments. I've got a couple more things that I want to share with you. And this is in the next section here. This is the Red Heifer. More amazing parallels with Yeshua. Can you believe this is all in these two Torah portions? We have such a rich blessing today in these two Torah portions. I'm going to read this little section in chapter 19. I skipped over a little bit of stuff in chapters 17 and 18, but I'm going to jump forward into chapter 19. And I want to read to you from 19, starting at the very beginning, a little bit about this most mysterious ritual in all of the Bible. The least understood. The rabbis are puzzled and baffled. King Solomon, in all his wisdom, was puzzled and baffled by this most mysterious ritual in the Torah. Here's what it says. Then Yehovah spoke to Moshe and Aharon and said, "This is the statute, Chukat, of the Torah, which Yehovah has commanded, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel that they bring you an unblemished red heifer." A heifer is a young female cow, in which is no defect, and on which a yoke has never been placed. You shall give this young red heifer to Eleazar, the priest, and it shall be brought outside the camp and be slaughtered in his presence. Next, Eleazar, the priest, shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle some of its blood toward the front of the tent of meeting 7 times. Then the heifer shall be burned in his sight. its hide and its flesh and its blood with its refuse shall be burned. The priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet wool or material of some kind, and cast it into the midst of the burning heifer. The priest shall then wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward come into the camp. But the priest shall be unclean until evening. The one who burns it shall also wash his clothes in water and bathe his body in water, and shall be unclean until evening. Now a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer, and deposit them outside the camp in a clean place, and the congregation of the sons of Israel shall keep it as water to remove impurity, for it is purification from sin. The one who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And it shall be a perpetual statute to the sons of Israel and to the alien who sojourns among them. The one who touches the corpse of any person shall be unclean for 7 days. That one shall purify himself from uncleanness with the water on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and then he will be clean. But if he does not purify himself on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, he will not be clean. Anyone who touches a corpse, the body of a man who has died, and does not purify himself, defiles the tabernacle of Yahweh, and that person shall be cut off from Israel. Because the water for impurity was not sprinkled on him, he shall be unclean. His uncleanness is still on him. This is the law when a man dies in a tent. Everyone who comes into the tent and everyone who is in the tent shall be unclean for 7 days. Every open vessel which has no covering tied down on it shall be unclean. Also, anyone who in the open field touches one who has been slain with a sword, or who has died naturally, or a human bone, or a grave, shall be unclean for 7 days. Then the unclean person, they shall take some of the ashes of the burnt purification for sin, and flowing water shall be added to them in a vessel. A clean person shall take hyssop and dip it into the water and sprinkle it on the tent and on all the furnishings and on the persons who were there and on the one who touched the bone or the one slain or the one dying naturally or the grave. Then the clean person shall sprinkle on the unclean on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. And on the 7th day he shall purify him from uncleanness, and he shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and shall be clean by evening. But the man who is unclean and does not purify himself from uncleanness, that person shall be cut off from the midst of the assembly, because he has defiled the sanctuary of Yahweh. The water for impurity has not been sprinkled on him, he is unclean. So it shall be a perpetual statute for them. And he who sprinkles the water for impurity shall wash his clothes, and he who touches the water for impurity shall be unclean until evening. Furthermore, anything that the unclean person touches shall be unclean, and the person who touches it shall be unclean until evening. Now, fascinating ritual. I want to just point out to you, if you... Oh, Tammy asked, no, do we still have to do this? No. I think that this is a ritual that has been... this is a perfect, really interesting, perfect shadow picture of the Messiah Yeshua. I think that's why it's one of those mysterious things that is pointing to the Messiah that no one could quite understand. But when you have seen the Messiah Yeshua come, and then you begin to think about this critically, it takes a minute to tear it apart and really think about what is being said here, because some very strange things are happening. And I'll point them out to you, and as I'm repeating them for you more slowly and walking you through just a few of them, you will start to hear the Messiah Yeshua very clearly presented in this heifer ritual. So think about this. This is a female cow with all red hairs, unblemished. Now, the way that this is worded in the Hebrew seems to suggest, and it does to the rabbis, I don't know whether this is realistic or valid or not, but they have interpreted this as this cow has to be purely red. It cannot have two hairs that are not the same color. That is why you can see movies have been made and television shows and stuff about this red heifer. It's some kind of weird, like unicorn, a pure red heifer that meets the rabbinic criteria to be the red heifer that this water needs to be created with, is like a unicorn. It's a mythical beast that it's very, very rare, if anyone has ever seen one in history. Now, what does that remind you of? I don't think I need to tell you. This is a cow that is pure red, is entirely without blemish. That's Yeshua. He was entirely without sin. Okay, this thing is taken outside the camp by Aaron's son, not Aaron. I'm not exactly sure why that is. Some have suggested that because of what's coming up next in my description, Aaron could not possibly be involved in this ritual, because the priest is not the high priest. Aaron is the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, the big kahuna. You know, it's so funny. I don't know if you're aware of this, but big kahuna is not Hawaiian. That is actually a Hebrew phrase. Literally, the Hebrew phrase is big kahuna. I thought, you got to be kidding me. It's not a joke. That is a Hebrew phrase. That is not a Hawaiian phrase. But Aaron could not possibly take part in this ritual because he would be defiling himself ritually on purpose, and he cannot do that. Some have suggested that Aaron could not take part in this ritual because of the incident of the golden calf. I don't know, but I just know that he's not supposed to do it. His son Aaron is supposed to do it. This red cow is slaughtered, and its blood is sprinkled. Now, this according to Josephus and some other early sources, this cow was killed on the Mount of Olives, quarter mile away from the temple. They did this on the Mount of Olives, directly across from the entrance to the tabernacle, the temple. And they would slaughter this animal, and the priest would take some of this blood and sprinkle it in the direction of the tabernacle or the temple 7 times. Now that priest, Aaron's son, who did that, is now ritually unclean. Puzzling. Because he has done all kinds of different things with blood over at the tabernacle, sprinkled it on the altar, put it on the Ark of the Covenant, all different kinds of stuff. Throwing it on people, and he's not unclean. But now he sprinkles this blood of this heifer 7 times in the direction of the tabernacle, and he's now unclean. Interesting. So then a clean person will take this animal, and the whole thing, not just a part of it, every bit of it, is entirely engulfed in a blazing bonfire. They will add some scarlet yarn and some hyssop and some cedar wood, toss that into the blazing inferno, and then the ashes will be gathered up with a shovel or some such thing and stored in a clean place outside the camp. Everyone involved in this ritual is now ritually unclean. Everyone involved with the slaughter of the red heifer is now ritually unclean. But you can now take these ashes and you can keep them in a place, and every time you need to, maybe you take a teaspoonful of it and you put it in a pitcher of water and you mix it up, and then you take a hyssop branch and you dip it in that water and you fling it on somebody on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and only in the case of ritual impurity that comes into when you come into contact with death, which we all have. And the person who is sprinkling the water becomes unclean. The person who has the water sprinkled on them becomes clean. It's fascinating. I cannot possibly explain this to you so that you'll be like, understand every part of it. I mean, this is one of the most strange things. Who's going to tell me what's up?
I just thought about something. I don't know. It might have relevance. That person sprinkling the water becomes unclean, and then when getting sprinkled on becomes clean. Could that be Yeshua purifying us, and He taking on our sins?
I think so, 100%. Absolutely, I do. The thing that puzzles me is, what does it mean that the person everyone who's involved with the sacrificial offering of this red heifer is now unclean? I personally don't know how to answer that question, except one idea came to my mind. And that might be a prophetic shadow picture of who was involved in the sacrificial offering of Yeshua.
Yeah,
The chief priests and the Pharisees and the scribes and the rulers who have now become ritually unclean because of their involvement with this ritual. Because these priests do this kind of stuff all the time. And now, all of a sudden, they're becoming unclean just for this one thing that they're involved in. And it's just about making some, I mean, if you ever know anything about making lye soap, it's essentially what they're doing. They're making lye soap. Animal fat and ashes mixed with water. It's basically lye. They're creating soap. Yeshua, fully man, being red. Yes, absolutely. And I think it's a wonderful picture of Yeshua becoming somehow unclean because of our sin going into him, on him. It's an interesting idea. The people who were involved with the ritual sacrifice that Yeshua became unclean, but the waters of purification from him cleanse the one who is sprinkled. I think Paul or Peter, talks about being sprinkled with the blood of Yeshua. So I think that this thing is a really, that's why I think it's so mysterious to people who read this, is because it's a picture of Yeshua, and it's got a lot of seeming contradictions. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeshua took on the sins of the world, and we're talking about billions of people. Our opposed which have been more agonizing than the actual crucifixion, pain of crucifixion itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. So I wish that I could spend more time on it, but I want to share with you even more. There's more. I want to go on to the next little section because it just keeps building. We've got these are some of the little correlations to the Messiah Yeshua on your screen. You can see spotless, unblemished, unique offering sacrificed outside the camp. Yeshua was sacrificed outside the camp. Those engaged in the sacrifice become unclean. Those sprinkled by the waters of purification become clean. Now, in the next little section, this is 38 years later by many scholars' interpretation. That is both Jewish and Christian. That this next chapter, in chapter 20, we've jumped forward 38 years in time. But listen to what happens next. It's quite interesting. Then the sons of Israel, the whole congregation, came to the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Now Miriam died there and was buried there. There was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves against Moses and Aaron. The people thus contended with Moses and Aaron, saying, "If we had only perished when our brothers perished before Yehovah, why then have you brought Yehovah's assembly into this wilderness for us and our beasts to die here? Why have you made us come up from Egypt to bring us into this wretched place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there water to drink." Then Moshe and Aharon came in from the presence of the assembly to the doorway of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. This is almost an exact repeat. Then the glory of Yehovah appeared to them, and Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, "Take the rod and you and your brother Aaron assemble the congregation and speak to the rock before their eyes, that it may yield its water. Thus you shall bring forth water for them out of the rock, and let the congregation and their beasts drink. So Moses took the rod from before Yahweh, just as he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock. And he said to them, Listen now, you rebels, shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. And water came forth abundantly, and the congregation and their beasts drank. But Yahweh said to Moshe and Aaron, Because you have not believed me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. Those were the waters of Meribah, because the sons of Israel contended with Yahweh, and he proved himself holy among them. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, what just happened there? Did Moses and Aaron just get denied entry into the promised land themselves? Yes, they did. Yes, they did. And you're saying to yourself, but why? What just happened there? Is it because, I mean, these people, I believe, are the children of the people who had died in the wilderness. If most of those people, if this is 38 years later, then we know that that whole generation was supposed to die off in the wilderness, and I got to guess that many of them had. Because now, in the very next sections, you're going to see the children of Israel beginning to fight against some of the leaders on this other side of the Jordan. And so I believe that the 38 years has passed, and that these are the children of those Israelites who all died in the wilderness. They are testing, in a sense. Not real hardcore, not real rebellious, but they're grumbling. And they're saying, man, we're all going to die out here. They need to learn a lesson of faith. And unfortunately, Moses messed it up. Moses messed it up. Now, there are two things that I want to point out to you here. Number one, the rock in the wilderness. And again, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 tells us that that rock that follows them was the Messiah. It was Yeshua. This interesting thing here about Paul saying that this rock followed them, that's literally what it says in the Greek in 1 Corinthians. It says that this rock was following them in the wilderness. And interestingly enough, that's exactly what the Jewish sources say. In the Talmud, says that there was actually a rock that followed them in the wilderness and provided them with drink. This rock provided water. Now, all of a sudden,
Broken.
when it was busted open. Now, what's interesting is that this rock suddenly stopped giving them water. That's kind of what the Jewish mythology says, is that they actually say that this rock was called Miriam's well, and that this rock followed them through the wilderness, and that it stopped. Did you notice that it said that Miriam died at the very beginning of this chapter? And it's just real matter-of-factly. Doesn't say the people mourned for her, doesn't say they waited and had a funeral or nothing. It just said she died and was buried there. The sages suggest that because these people kind of disrespected Miriam, it's like the sister of Moses, she was held in fairly high regard. You remember when she got leprosy because of talking trash about her brother, and she got leprosy and was put outside the camp. The whole congregation waited in that location for 7 days for her to come back into the camp. But here it just says that she died. Now, I don't know if this is somehow connected, but Paul says that this rock was following them in the wilderness, and the Jews also say that this rock was following them in the wilderness. The Jews say rock was named after Miriam. They called it Miriam's well. The Christians, Paul apparently is saying that this rock is the Messiah Yeshua. But what is Moses supposed to do with this rock? He's supposed to go and speak to the rock. God tells him explicitly, I'm going to back up my notes here just briefly. It says, take the rod and you and your brother Aaron in verse 8, assemble the congregation and speak to the rock before their eyes. And water will come out. It will yield its water. Now, interesting thing happens when Moses actually gets there. He puts on a little show and says, listen now, you rebels, do we have to bring forth water for you out of this rock? And he, instead of speaking to it, strikes it twice. Now, interesting thing here. Have we heard this before? Yes, we have. There's another incident in the Torah where he's already had spoken to a rock previous to this. This is when they first left Egypt, at the beginning of that Exodus portion, at the end of the book of Exodus. I don't know the reference right off the top of my head, but if someone in the congregation there wants to put a note in the chat box for the others, you take a look at it, because in that instance, God told Moses to take his staff and go to this rock and strike it. And he struck it, and water came out. This time, he tells him to speak to the rock, and water will come out. But instead, he strikes it. And I don't know that he struck it twice. I think that what that word, he struck it twice, actually is referring to is 38 years ago, he struck it once. Now he strikes it again. This rock of Yeshua has been stricken twice. I don't believe that it means that Moses hit the rock 2 times. I believe he hit the rock when he was supposed to speak to it, and now the rock has been struck twice. That's not the way the shadow picture is supposed to work. I don't believe, the Jews believe, obviously, that Moses rebelled against God, and he was supposed to, not only did he strike the rock when he should have spoken to it, but he got arrogant and said, are we supposed to bring water out of this rock for you? That is certainly possible, and there seems to be an element of that. But I think what's even more important is Yeshua is our rock, and he was supposed to be stricken once and spoken to once, not stricken twice. It destroys the prophetic shadow picture. And I think that Moses messed that up and also was arrogant, but which seems so out of character for Moses. We've been told that he's the most humble person, but all of a sudden he's saying, hey, I'm going to strike this rock and water's going to come out. Aren't I cool? It seems so out of character. I got to wonder if surely that could be a part of it. And yet it seems so out of character. But I know, God knows, I know that sometimes we do things that are out of character. Angela?
Maybe there are those that will try to strike the rock when he comes back a second time and will be denied entry.
Okay, yeah, there's a good point that there are those who, when Yeshua arrives the second time, will try to strike that rock for a second time and will be denied entry to the kingdom. But here we have another prophetic shadow picture of the Messiah Yeshua regarding this rock in the wilderness being stricken, and just amazing stuff. But there's more, but who wants to talk about it?
It's me. I just see a similar behavior with him and the tablets when the anger is thrown on the tablets, and then he just has this little affinity for getting a little bit upset.
Yes, that's a good point.
And I do think, Alan, to who has much, who knows more is expected, and Moses was supposed to know better, probably.
Yeah, I think that's a good insight, because when we first come into contact with Moses in the Torah, it tells us that, when he was grown, he killed an Egyptian. He certainly seems to be a bit of a hothead. He has made, he gets angry. He has some right. He has an outsized sense of justice, and he is willing to get a little hot. He gets a little hot under the collar when he sees injustice, and I get that. But he does sometimes not, keep control of himself. He shouldn't have killed that dude. That was not a righteous killing. I mean, yeah, this dude was beating somebody. Well, you can't murder a dude for beating somebody. That was not a righteous thing that he did himself. It wasn't exactly right. What's that?
A good headlock would have sufficed.
A good headlock would have sufficed. This is Marie kicking you, Wayne?
Yeah, I just got a nice little strike on the rock.
You go, Marie. Beat that boy about the head and shoulders. No, that's a good insight. What's that?
I have a question too.
Please.
It says indeed for that what he did, therefore he was not allowed to bring the whole congregation with him to the land that he has promised them, right? Which he has given them. So does that mean that Moses himself was also basically condemned not to go to heaven, or?
No, I don't believe that that's the case. Yeah, no, that's a good question, but I don't believe that that's the case. That would be very unusual indeed if we were to say, yeah, I think you don't want to equate enter the land with going to heaven, so to speak. And when I spoke early on in this conversation that we began tonight, and I said to you, suppose for the sake of discussion, that Yeshua says, hey, this group over here who thinks they're all something and got it all figured out, you ain't coming into the land. Do not misunderstand me to say you guys aren't going to heaven. You guys are not going to be, you're not my, I don't have anything to do with you. I am not saying that. What I am saying is, just like that generation that died in the wilderness, I do not believe that we can say that they are not going to heaven, they were rejected by God. Or we're going to have to say that Miriam, Aaron, and Moses himself are burning in hell somewhere. I cannot accept that. And I do not believe that that's what the text is telling us. Yes, please, just one sec. It is saying to me, at this time, as the first resurrection, as the first fruits coming into the land, you are not eligible for that. You will be in the kingdom, but you are not eligible to go in this first group. Don't know exactly how that's working, but I would not say, Moses doesn't get to go to heaven because he screwed that up. My opinion, throwing that out there. Could not prove it to you one way or the other, but maybe Marie can. You go, girl.
No, what I'm saying is that I see a picture of, sometimes things happen like Jesus said to his brothers, you meant it for bad, but God meant it for good. And I think it's a picture of Moses leaving, actually being, for lack of the word, the set of believers who get raptured and get that incorruptible body. Moses is representing those people, and then we have a second set of people who be into the land in their physical bodies. So I think that's the picture I'm seeing with Moses leaving, actually going into the promised land right then and there. But
yeah.
Of course pretty sure he went to a good place.
Absolutely. And you could never prove that, but I appreciate you saying so. And I would say just overall in general, us Christians have had for a long time some really weird ideas about heaven and hell and who's going here and who's doing that, and almost none of it is biblical. It's just not. It's very oversimplified, and people painting with really broad brush strokes and saying, "No, this group is over here doing that," and you could never prove any of that. And there's been a lot of liberties taken with the text, and I would say we need to steer clear about making categorical statements about who's in what group. You can get some hints and some ideas, but it's just not at this point. To me, it's just not been fully revealed, and there's a good deal of speculation involved in that. But I would say it doesn't work for me to think about Moses being denied entry into the kingdom of heaven. he did blow his chance for direct access, but not ultimately, I don't believe.
Well, I would say that because he's definitely one of the major pillars of salvation story, and for the simple reason that he probably didn't make it to land, but he had the privilege of being with Elijah on that mountain meeting with Yeshua.
There you go.
So that's telling you that if he's up there with Elijah and Yeshua, that he is gone to a better place than that land that they were promised.
Yes, excellent insight. Excellent
And
insight.
also, Alan, in Hebrew 11, where they talk about them not getting the promise, towards the end of that chapter, it does say they already attained the promise, and we should look to get that promise. I mean, get the reward.
Yeah.
It does say that. If you look carefully at the last, maybe 39 or 40 of Hebrew 11, it does say that all these people they described in Hebrew 11, they got it, and we are supposed to diligent and try to get it too. That's what it says.
Agreed.
So,
Absolutely.
so
Good
yeah,
insight.
so-
Good insight. I know we're running low on time here, so I'm going to cut to the chase. I've got just one tiny little section here that I want to read to you, and that is in regards to the Bronze Serpent. Another. Yes, I know. Can you believe that this is all in just these two sections right here? Yes, Yeshua references this directly. Another wonderful shadow picture. So then in chapter 21, I'm going to start in verse 4. It says, Then they set out from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom, and the people became impatient because of the journey, and the people spoke against God and against Moses. And they said, Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? Again, they're complaining. For there is no food and no water, and we've loathed this miserable food. They're talking about the manna, the heavenly bread. They loathe it. And Yehovah sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, so that many people of Israel died. So the people came to Moshe and said, We have sinned, because we have spoken against Yehovah and you. They've never done this before. Intercede for you with Yehovah, that he may remove the serpents from us. And Moshe interceded for the people. Then Yehovah said to Moshe, Make a fiery serpent, and set it on a standard. And it shall come about that anyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, he will live. And Moshe made a bronze serpent and set it on the standard, and it came about that if a serpent bit any man, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. Fascinating. Those bitten by the fiery serpents. Now, the fiery serpent is Nechashim HaSepharim. You ever heard the word Sepharim? You ever heard that before? There's a particular type of angel that is in some of the heavenly visions of Ezekiel and Isaiah. This is an angel that is almost seeming to be like made out of fire. And this is the same root. That these fiery serpents, Nechashim HaSepharim, they are biting the people. The enemy, it is believed, the Satan himself is a rebellious Sepharim. And he has bitten the people. The people have been bitten by a fiery serpent. And they must look to a fiery serpent, a Nekashim, bronze, reddish serpent made out of bronze or copper or something like that is put up on a stick, and if they just look at it, they get healed by being bitten by fiery serpents. Fascinating. That is Yeshua himself, when he was talking to Nicodemus in the book of John, I believe it's chapter 4. No, 6 perhaps. I'm maybe mistaken about that. He says to Nicodemus, as the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. This is another one of those wonderful and amazing parallels regarding Yeshua and this bronze serpent. I don't have time to dig any further into that, but I want to point out one thing, and that is that in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 18, the king of Judah, who is a righteous king named Hezekiah, he actually destroys that bronze serpent. That bronze serpent was still around in the days of Hezekiah, and that's 400, maybe 400 years later. That bronze serpent is still around. And Hezekiah destroyed it because the people began to worship it. Now there's another prophetic shadow picture. What do you think that might be a prophetic shadow picture of? Any ideas? I think it's possible. And some of you might be thinking, he ain't going to say it. He ain't going to say it. No, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say that some people are worshiping Jesus. And that's that's not what I'm going to say. What I am going to say is perhaps some have worshiped the symbol of Jesus, the cross. That the cross has taken on some type of worship as a type of idolatry. And I think that much could very well be true. That over Christian history, the cross has taken on some stronger sense than it really had any right to. And that some people could have been guilty of idolatry and somehow attaching themselves to the cross. I mean, is it the cross that's insignificant? No, it's the guy who used to be on the cross and who died and was resurrected. The significance is that he's not on the cross. So why people decided to worship the instrument of the Messiah's death is a little bit of a interesting thing. I mean, you know that the cross began to be used as a religious symbol a little ways after Yeshua, and it was mostly by Gentiles. The early Christians, who were most of them Jews, used the symbol of the fish, which was the Hebrew letter nun, which is the letter for life.
Not the symbol of death.
Not the symbol of death, but the symbol of life. And that it's possible that these Gentile Christians actually somehow came along and came up with this idea of using the symbol of his death as the representation of him. Which was probably a mistake, but I don't necessarily think if some of you are wearing crosses around your neck that it rises to that level. It's just a cultural symbol at this point, which represents Yeshua. But some people take that cross very seriously and might actually worship it. But I think, unfortunately, that is demonstrated in the second Chronicles, I believe it is 2 Kings, chapter 18. Where it says that Hezekiah actually had to destroy that thing because the people were worshiping it. So many amazing and wonderful pictures of the Messiah Yeshua in these Torah portions. Just amazing stuff. And I hope that it was enlightening for you and that you learned some stuff by it. I'm going to wrap up here. If you have any final comments, questions, or concerns, I'll pray and then we'll wrap up. Go ahead.
No concerns. Just a little bit maybe a sarcasm, but I'm surprised that they don't wear. Well, I won't say they because one time in my life when I was young, I wore a crucifix around my neck. You might as well wear an emblem of an empty grave or an empty coffin around your neck.
Yeah, that's a similar thing, sure. But and I wouldn't say anything about that in a negative way myself personally, because I think it's if you want to wear a cross, I think you could come up with better symbols. But whatever.
I'm a little more bothered when they have the dead body.
I'm a little bit more. Angela said I'm a little bit more concerned when there's actually a cross with a picture of Jesus' body on it. That's a purely Catholic thing. Most Christians don't do that, but many Catholics do. I get the picture. I know the picture. It's just wrong all the way around.
It's a little too early.
Yeah.
The picture was snapped just a little early.
Yeah, the picture was snapped just a little early. Go ahead. So, no, that's, I thank you guys for the discussion tonight. Thank you for those of you who were able to chime in and ask some questions. Good stuff. Just a powerful section. And I know, next time we're going to be doing Torah portion Balak, which is another really, really important Torah portion. There's a lot of ties to the book of the Revelation. So another one also has amazing references, shadow pictures of the Messiah Yeshua. So take your time this week and read over Torah portion Balak repeatedly. Balak, the destroyer?
Is that what that means?
I believe so. Yeah, Balak, I believe, means the destroyer. So that's in Numbers 22 through 25. So take a look at that. Thank you guys so much for joining us this evening. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up and pray, and we'll hope to see you next time online.